Welcome to my running solo and GM-less games video. My name is Roosevelt Cooper from Golden Acacia Gaming. In this video, I'm going to be demonstrating to you how you can use the Mythic Game Master Emulator system to generate surprises for yourself in your solo play by utilizing the random event mechanic. Now, if you're familiar with the way the Mythic Game Master Emulator system works, you generate expected scenes based upon what you believe is going to happen next, utilizing the context of the game that you're playing and the adventure. However, if that's all you did, then there's not going to be a whole lot of surprise in your games because you're basically generating the scenes yourself. You play out the scenes and you're pretty much going to know exactly what's going to happen. The only intrigue that you're going to experience with that is when you actually resolve the scene, whether it's a combat scene or whether you're interacting with another character and you may have to make a series of checks to see how that character responds to you. That's the only surprise that you're going to get from that experience. And that surprise is going to be based upon the roll of a die. However, Mythic has a mechanic called random events that can generate surprise situations in your adventure, even though you are solo playing and you're basically serving the role as both the game master who knows everything and the player character who only knows what they're interacting with. Mythic generates random events in two areas. The first area is when you consult Mythic by asking a fate question. So this is where you have a question about what's happening in the scene and you'll ask Mythic a question such as, is the door locked? And you'll determine what's the likelihood that the door is locked. And then you'll roll on the fate chart table to see whether the answer to that question is yes or no. In addition to answering the question, Mythic can also generate a random event from that experience. The second way that Mythic can generate random events for you is when you come up with your expected scene. So you will come up with a scene based upon what you expect to happen next, and then you're going to test that scene by rolling against the current chaos factor. If you roll equal to or lower than what the current chaos factor is, then you can generate what's either called an altered scene, where the scene that you expect to happen actually happens but is altered in some way, or you can generate an interrupt scene, where the interrupt scene basically replaces your expected scene, and you can utilize a random event to generate the interrupt scene. So once you generate a random event, the next step is to figure out exactly what happens in this random event. To do that, you want to consider the context of what has occurred prior to this random event being generated, as well as the overall context of the adventure world that you're playing in. For example, if you're currently searching a dungeon for treasure, that's going to inform the context of what happens in a random event. So if you open up the door to a locked room in a dungeon and then a random event is triggered, you opening up that unlocked door now serves as the context of the random event. You being in the dungeon period serves as the context for the random event. You playing in some type of medieval fantasy world also generates context for the random event. So you want to consider all of the context for what you've been playing so far to determine what the random event is going to be. As you consider the context, the first step to generating a random event is to determine what the event focus is. And inside the Mythic Game Master Emulator, there's a table called the Event Focus table. You roll a D100, and based upon what your roll is, that will determine what the event focus is. So let's say, for instance, you roll and you get a 74. When I consult the event focus table, 74 is PC negative. So that's pretty self-explanatory. What that basically means is whatever this random event is, it's based upon something negative happening to one or more of the player characters. Now keep in mind, because you are always considering the current context of the adventure and the world that you're playing in, you don't always have to roll on the table to determine what the random event is. When factoring in the context, maybe the random event is pretty obvious what the event focus is. So you can feel free to pick one of the options on the table if the context of the random event makes it pretty obvious what the event focus is. Feel free to pick something as opposed to rolling. Now, sometimes the random event will impact one or more of your lists that you're working with in Mythic. For example, you might have your threads list, which shows you what are some of the threads that you're currently working on trying to resolve right now. You might also have your characters list, which indicates some of the important characters that you are encountering in your adventure and who you expect to encounter again. So if the random event is involving one of those areas, then you're going to roll on the threads table or the characters table to see which thread or which character is being impacted by this random event. Once you identify what the event focus is, the next step is to identify the event meaning. To identify the event meaning, Mythic has a series of D100 tables that you can roll on. You basically roll on one of the tables and then you roll on the second table. It's going to generate 2 words for you. And then using those 2 words, you'll come up with what you think the random event is based upon those 2 words. They have 3 tables that you can roll on. The first table is called the actions table. The second table is called the descriptor table. And the third table is called the elements table. You can pick and choose which table is most appropriate based upon the context of what's going on in your adventure. So let's say my first roll is a 33 and I'm rolling on the actions table. And my second roll is a 57. So 33 on the first actions table is destroy. 57 on the second actions table is nature. So destroy nature is the 2 words that I could come up with. So based upon those 2 words, I will now come up with an interpretation of what I think the random event is. I know that it's PC negative, so I know something negative is happening to the PC. And the 2 words that I got is destroy nature. So maybe in this case, there might be some type of plant creature that might be attacking the PC. Or maybe there might be some type of natural trap that may have ensnared the PC. So I just basically come up with what I think it is based upon what I'm being prompted with. Sometimes you might not be sure. Maybe you're not coming up with anything based upon the words. One of the things you can do is you can go ahead and you can consult the fate chart and ask a fate question. So maybe you might say, is the PC being attacked? And then you could come up with the likelihood of that. So you roll on that, and if the answer is yes, now you know. If the answer is no, then maybe come up with something else. Sometimes you might just want to roll again on the meaning table and come up with 2 other words. So if you roll on the meanings table again, come up with 2 more words, now you can combine the 4 words and use that to give you some inspiration as far as what the random event could be. Another option for you if you can't come up with anything, if you are online, you're using a computer and you have internet access, you can check out one of these artificial intelligence tools, such as ChatGPT, and give the words that you came up with from the meaning table to ChatGPT, and ask ChatGPT to give you some recommendations as far as what could possibly be the random event, telling ChatGPT first the context of what's going on in your adventure. So that's an option. I rarely do that because I usually will just come up with something myself, but could be very helpful if you find yourself as someone who has difficulty coming up with different things. And then the final option, if you absolutely cannot come up with anything, then you always have the option to just drop the random event and continue on with the adventure. I typically will not do this. I wouldn't recommend doing this unless you just have no other option and you just can't come up with anything. But that is always an option if worst case scenario, you can't come up with anything and you can't think of anything for the random event. So that's how you use the Mythic Game Master Emulator to generate random events. Random events are so much fun. They can pretty much change the entirety of where you're going with the adventure and can really generate some surprise for you in the adventure. And if you watch my actual play videos, you'll see some random events come up that will pretty much change exactly where I was going with the adventure completely. And it really creates surprise and intrigue in the solo play experience. Typically something that you would only have when you have a GM. You can actually have that type of surprise in your solo play. All right, so try that out. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments and I'll be more than happy to help you with any questions you might have. Take care.